We spend so much of our time scrolling through our social feeds, but have you ever really stopped to think about whether that scrolling is, well, scrolling through your emotions too? Just how much of what you feel is being shaped by what you see online? I mean, really think about it. One second, you're seeing a friend's amazing vacation photos, and the very next post is someone's angry rant about their commute. Does that emotional whiplash, that joy, or that frustration actually transfer to you right through the screen? Well, believe it or not, there's actually a scientific name for this: emotional contagion. And this is a real thing, something we see all the time in our face to face lives. You walk into a room where everyone is laughing and you just can't help but smile yourself. We literally catch feelings from each other. Okay, but online, that's a whole different ballgame, right? In person, you've got smiles, you've got frowns, the tone of someone's voice, all those little cues. Online, a lot of the time, all you have are the words on the screen. So the huge question was, can emotion really spread without any of that? Can text alone do the job? So to figure this out once and for all, a team of researchers from Facebook and Cornell University decided to run a truly massive experiment. And when I say massive, I am not kidding. They included almost 700,000 Facebook users. And the crazy part? None of them knew they were part of it. This wasn't some tiny study in a lab. This was happening out in the wild at an incredible scale. So, for one single week back in January of 2012, these researchers set up this huge secret experiment to see if they could prove, for the first time ever, that our feelings can actually spread through a digital network. So how'd they do it? Well, it was actually pretty ingenious. They took this giant pool of users, and for some of them, they just subtly tweaked their news feeds. It's kind of like they had a volume knob for emotions. For some people, they turned down the positive posts, and for others, they turned down the negative ones. And then they just sat back and watched to see if that little change in what people saw affected what people wrote. So here's a look at the two main groups in the experiment. You had one group where the algorithm just showed them a few less of the happy, positive posts from their friends. And then for the other group, it showed them a few less of the negative ones. And it's super important to note, these posts weren't deleted or anything. They just didn't show up in the newsfeed as often. And of course, to do this right, they needed a control group. For these folks, the same number of posts were hidden, but just totally at random. It didn't matter if they were happy or sad. This was just to make sure that whatever they found wasn't just because people were seeing fewer posts in general, but because of the type of posts they were seeing. Super smart. Okay, so that's the setup. You've got this massive behind-the-scenes experiment, messing with the emotional diet of almost 700,000 people. The big question is, what happened? Did it work? Did tweaking the emotional flavor of what people saw in their news feeds actually change the emotions they expressed themselves? The answer, it turns out, was a big, resounding yes. What they found was this undeniable link between the emotions people were shown and the emotions they put out there themselves. So let's put it in simple terms. When Facebook dialed down the positive posts in someone's feed, that person started posting fewer positive words themselves. And get this, they also started posting more negative words. And it worked the other way too. When they dialed down the negativity, people's own posts became more positive and less negative. This was it. The proof. For the very first time, we had actual experimental data showing that emotions can literally jump from person to person through a social network, using nothing more than text on a screen. But wait, there's more. They also stumbled onto something else really interesting they called a withdrawal effect. It turns out when people saw fewer emotional posts of any kind, positive or negative, they just talked less. They became less expressive altogether. Okay, but here's where the story gets really, really interesting and honestly a little controversial. Because while they proved the effect was real, the size of the effect on any one person was tiny. So you might be thinking, if the effect is that small, who cares? Why does it even matter? And to be fair, the researchers themselves were the first to admit it. They put it right there in their paper, saying that even though this was the first proof, quote, the effect sizes from the manipulations are small. They weren't trying to overstate their case at all. And just to give you a sense of how small we're talking, the technical measure for the effect size was as low as 0.001. For you or me as one person, a change that small is basically invisible. You would never ever notice it in your day-to-day life. But, and this is probably the most important but of this whole story, when you're dealing with a platform the size of Facebook, scale changes everything. Because what happens when you take that tiny, almost invisible effect and you multiply it by hundreds of millions of people? Well, the researchers did the math, and that tiny little statistical blip could actually add up to hundreds of thousands of real emotional posts being influenced every single day. So let's just recap the big takeaways here. First, emotions absolutely can spread online. No face-to-face contact needed. Second, just plain old text is powerful enough to do it. You don't need body language or tone of voice. And finally, and this is the big one, a tiny, tiny effect on one person can become a massive, world-shaping force when you apply it to millions. And all of this really leads us to one huge and kind of heavy question. If we know for a fact that the design of these platforms we use every day shapes our collective emotions, then who's responsible for that design? It's something we really have to think about now more than ever.